evening. Thanks for joining us tonight. Both presidential campaigns focusing on battleground state of Wisconsin tonight. Vice President Kamala Harris holding a rally in Madison. But first, we begin with former President Donald Trump campaigning in the Green Bay area. Chief political reporter Jason Zimmerman has your voice, your vote coverage from Ashwaubenon.
Former President Donald Trump arriving at Austin Straubel International Airport and then riding in a garbage truck as a political stunt.
They don't think in terms of garbage, okay?
Following President Joe Biden calling his supporters garbage on the campaign trail for Kamala Harris.
President Donald J. Trump.
Before arriving at the Resch Center to a near-capacity crowd wearing a safety vest.
And I have to begin by saying 250 million Americans are not garbage. My response to Joe and Kamala is very simple. You can't lead America if you don't love Americans. That's true.
Also on hand was a familiar face in Northeast Wisconsin.
First and foremost, are there any Packer fans in the house?
With former quarterback Brett Favre endorsing Trump and speaking at his first ever political rally.
Families across Wisconsin are struggling to make ends meet. People's salaries haven't kept up with inflation. It's getting harder for younger people to buy their first home. People are losing hope in the American dream.
Trump also focusing on the issue of immigration and mentioning a recent Oconto County incident where former Green Bay police detective Tom Roberts was killed by a suspected hit-and-run driver who was eventually arrested in Arkansas. Action 2 News is yet to verify the details Trump provided during the rally.
Instead of helping his critically injured victim, the illegal alien who had a can of beer in his passenger seat and lots of cans of beer and plenty of other things in the car, got out of his car and ran away, leaving the retired policeman to die and bleed to death. We're praying for his family. The United States is now an occupied country.
Trump once again telling supporters that if he wins Wisconsin, he wins the White House. The former president will be back in the state at least one more time before Election Day for a rally Friday in Milwaukee. Reporting in Ashwaubenon, Jason Zimmerman, Action 2 News.